So, welcome back, everybody. I hope we come to the end of the conference. 3 intense days. As a final speaker, we have the pleasure of greeting Payesh once more. And we've been here several times. And we've known each other for a long, long time. Some of you were not even born, probably, when we first met. But anyway, Rai, if you like, you can start your presentation.
Thank you, Alfred, and thank you, everyone. I hope that I don't make everyone more cansado or fatigué, because I know it's been 3 days, and I apologize for not, again, being able to attend many of the great papers, but I will see the recordings with great interest, and hopefully we can have a conversation individually. It is true, Alfred, I think 2027 is special for the Heidegger world because I think of 100-year anniversary of Sein und Zeit, but it's the 25th anniversary. I'm getting a notice about a speaking language. English. Okay. It's the 25th anniversary of the Forschungsgruppe, 2002, if I'm not mistaken. And Alfred, you look the same.
Well, a bit more gray, less hair and more gray.
For all of us. Okay, let me begin and share my text because I know we want to conclude and hear Alfred's concluding remarks. So I apologize because the title, can everyone see the text and hear me okay?
Yep. The title is paper in itself.
So the title has changed a bit. I was a bit mystified by in the English translation of Macquarie and Robertson, 1962, of a footnote in chapter 5 of Division 2 on Geschichtlichkeit, historicality, temporality, and historicality in English. But some of you may recall a very cryptic footnote at the end on the Hellsichtigkeit, clairvoyance, is what the translators, English translators say. This may take on a mystical kind of component when he's talking about the Augenblick, the moment of vision. But then also the Ohnmacht, which is translated in English as powerlessness. But again, the translators tell us, well, wait a minute, this is more like when you faint, maybe because you're so tired, you're about to faint, you're swooning, you're about to collapse. So I was a bit perplexed by that footnote, and that's, I thought I'd have to build up to that moment by introducing these other sections, and that's what this paper became, and that's why you see the long title, Ecstatic, Temporality and Transcendence, section 65, chapter 3, and then section 69, of which I've gotten to spend more time with, maybe slightly underappreciated, because 65 is where everything seems to be introduced on ecstatic temporality. But 69 is very special, chapter 4 on the everyday registers of temporality. And of course, for those of us that really do spend a lot of time with being in time, the problem of the Bewegung, the Bewegtheit, the movement, and the two ends of Dasein, not just Sein zum Tode, being towards death, but Sein zum Anfang, being towards birth. But the whole problem of the Bewegung, movement in chapter 5. This is a two-part article that I'll be releasing over the next year. It got broken up because I got stuck in one section and I went over the limit for the article length for submission. So I had to break it up into two, but also because, as always, I want to do Heidegger. We're a Heidegger group where we all are passionate about Heidegger, but I then get lost in Hegel, so it became a second part. I'm only going to focus on, quite frankly, one section of part 1, and in that one quote in Being in Time in section 69. That's where we'll spend most of our time. And I do have, because of the group, 4 translations. Here's the Spanish. This is the Chilean translator, I believe, from a few years ago. Here's Macquarie Robinson, 1962. There's, of course, the original German, and then the Martineau, 1985 French translation. So we can see some select words in all 3 because we have a multilingual audience. But of course, my native tongue is English, so I'll be spending a lot of time in English. Okay, so without further ado, I just want to jump right to the text. And I'll begin reading my text. And I hope to stop in 30 minutes so we can have plenty of time for discussion. Opening the clearedness. This is the opening section 69, chapter 4, division 2, being in time. Section 69 throws us right into the deep end in elaborating what was begun in section 65 on the obscure complexity of ecstatic temporality. And here's the passage that opens that subsection of 69. The ecstatical unity of temporality, that is, the unity of the outside of itself, in the raptures of the future, of what has been and of the present, is a condition for the possibility that there can be an entity which exists as it's there. The entity which bears the title being there is one that has been cleared, and that has an endnote to the end of the text. The light which constitutes this clearedness, Gelichtigkeit of Dasein, is not something ontically present at hand as a power or source for radiant brightness occurring in the entity on occasion. That by which this entity is essentially cleared, in other words, that which makes it both open for itself and bright for itself, is what we've defined as care, Zorga. In advance of any temporal interpretation, in care is grounded the full disclosingness of the there. So a lot of us can debate Zorga, a lot of us have thought about Zorga and try to think of not only chapter 6, division 1, but how it plays a role throughout division 2. Seems to be the crux of the whole story, Zorga, but we'll see there's more. Only by this clearness is any illuminating or illumining, any awareness seeing or having of something made possible. We understand the light of this clearness only if we are not seeking some power implanted in us and present at hand. No subject, no mind, no imagination. Don't think of something present at hand. Don't think of a light bulb, internal light, the soul. Many different ways that we can become ontic. But Heidegger, of course, is trying to lay the grounds for fundamental ontology. But are interrogating the whole constitution of Dasein's being, namely care, and interrogating it as to the unitary basis for its existential possibility. I love this last sentence. Ecstatic temporality clears the there primordial. So let us make clear that Heidegger is not referring to the there as the external space of nature available to a subject who perceives, intuits, or envelops space. The hard thing to do for anyone is to decouple the meaning of the there in the ontological sense from our normal empirical senses that related to space or spatiality. I think, this is my interpretation, but the Kant-Heidegger debates are obviously very complex. It is also not that of an internal mechanism like Kant's transcendental apperception. So, the Critique of Pure Reason, I have that in the footnote. I don't want to replay it, but there's a very specific definition that Kant gives of this, that both constitutes the subject in relation to itself and in relation to an external object, which is also, because it's transcendental, prior to all data received from intuitions or the senses in experience. Rather, this lies prior to any seeing anything, whether a perception of the external object or the internal non-sensory perception within the imagination that can never refer to some outside sensory object, the thing in itself. The there is definitely not present at hand, like the page you're reading now. Therefore, for Heidegger, we cannot assume a pre-existing I is unchanging through the changes in and of experience. That would be the unity of apperception in Kant. Furthermore, if you go back to chapter 4 in division 1, we cannot even presuppose an I, ich, yo, to begin with when probing the being of Dasein in terms of the who question of Dasein. Now we can really start to read critically from the first line of section 69 to unpack the density of every phrase and every sentence. We are concerned with the initial connection between ecstatic temporality, and we can spend a lot of time with 65, we will, to a large extent, and the Gelichtigkeit, the clearness. There's something strange about the unity, the Einheit, inherent in ecstatic temporality. Do not think of it as the sum of two numbers, or how a work of art achieves its unity in some final truth, or in the mind of the art critic, of how a work hangs together and accomplishes something. Unity is not that of a perfect democratic polis where all conflict and dissent have been overcome, as if such a thing can exist. Unity is not that of the solidarity of all those engaged in a social movement or a coalition of social movements to challenge some status quo. And it's not the nation state, it's not the globe, it's not the human species. These are all ontic registers of the term unity, of which there are numerous other semantic possibilities. But those of you that know the ancient Greek texts, let's avoid the temptation of Plato's founding moments in Western philosophy, the problem of the one and the many in his great Parmenides, or how Aristotle tries to resolve this in both the Nicomachean Ethics and the Metaphysics. We will return to these Western foundations, but phenomenologically, we need to suspend and bracket what this epoch, the entire span of historical time, from Plato to Aristotle to Kant to Hegel, means to us. We care about what Heidegger's text is telling us, that is his novel introduction to ecstatic temporality, which is not articulated in the way that Heidegger does in Being and Time at any time prior in the history of Western philosophy and Christianity. Some people may dispute that. He has roots and he draws from so many different elements of the Western tradition. But some may believe that, in fact, what he's introducing is quite new, at least in the articulation of the question of time. At least according to Heidegger, the entire Western tradition of ontology, the unities of the forms of being, of the transcendental perception, of spirit's notion, and Hegel, is being destroyed, section 6. This does not mean that Heidegger's thought does not have roots in pretty much the entire tradition, what I just said. That's not the point. We must creatively try to expand on Heidegger's initial ideas and give new meaning to them that is not available in his text. The unity in this opening moment of section 69 is actually split, a non-original caesura that does not offer itself as a present-at-hand difference, say a line drawn in the middle of a page dividing it in two halves. That means its interrelation gives rise to the possibility of sensing what lies beyond the horizon of simple identity and difference, and any simple dialectical synthesis. For example, the unity of A, which does not equal B, with the negation and raising to a higher level that very difference between A and B in C. That's a very simplistic kind of characterization of a three-moment dialectic. Rather, the primordial outside of itself and in it for itself, the ecstaticon in section 65, acquires some added features, so to speak, in the opening of section 69. So what's happening in 69 versus 65? The outside of itself is the transcendental horizon. Such a horizon stretches out any possibility of an in and for itself, which is not some atomistic point called the subject, which then intuits space and time internally and externally without reducing them to the object of experience, to go back to Kant. Rather, we have a strange non-identity in the juxtaposition of relation and difference of the outside of itself. What is this outside of itself? Forever other to oneself, as if standing over oneself as a horizon of the possibility to be, you're judging yourself, while questioning the original position of the oneself as an in and for itself, the latter of which is never ready to hand or present at hand. He's going to derive that from ecstatic temporality. It's likened to the movement of the ecstasies of temporality, as we shall see, which is never lined up one after another. And Heidegger says this in 65. And go back to 65. Temporality is not prior to itself, some transcendental condition before our experience of being thrown into the world, affecticity, not an empirical object, not present to hand, but the givenness of our thrownness and our projectedness and our anticipation of what it means to be as a condition for any clearing or there-ness of an experience, if you will. The movement, which is never lined up, temporality is not prior to itself and therefore does not emerge from itself. It's right from 65, but refers to a process of temporalizing in the unity of the ecstasies. Having said that, demonstrating an understanding of how Heidegger critiques the ordinary understanding of linear time as flowing now points, calendar, chronological, scientific, spatialized time is not enough. Furthermore, understanding how linear time is derived from the deeper primordial temporalizing of temporality is also not sufficient. we have to go deeper still than those 20th century interpretations of Heidegger by linking the questions of ecstatic temporality with the problem of movement, the Bewegtheit, and that's chapter 5. Not just the Geschichte or the Schicksal, and fate and destiny, and the Augenblick, and all the amazing things that happen in chapter 5, but specifically this problem of movement, Bewegtheit. If Heidegger's many stupendous achievements in being and time, and quite frankly, the earlier works, The Concept of Time, 1924, the 1925 lecture, is to deconstruct the linear sense of time as flowing now points and introduce in being time a more elaborate articulation of finite, ecstatic, unified, primordial, authentic temporalizing of temporality, then the same cannot be said on the distinction between the ontological mystery of movement, Bewegtheit, and the ontic, physical, experiential idea of motion. Witnessing motion, a thing in motion, motion itself, etc., etc. Traditional metaphysics, what perplexed the Greeks. So this ontological distinction, just like you have primordial temporality and linear time, fully, I wouldn't say fully elaborated, but fairly fleshed out. Chapter 3, all of chapter 4, until he gets to Hegel at the end, passing once again through Plato and Aristotle, inner Zeitigkeit within timeness, datability, etc., etc. With all the immense achievement of being time, and quite frankly, after being time, basic problems, phenomenology, the Leibniz book, 4 fundamental concepts of metaphysics, back to Aristotle and Hegel before 1931. But the movement problem as a change of location, overcoming that ontic sense, change of location over distance measured by clock time. If it turns out that movement as an enigma, razzo, may be harder to treat than ecstatic temporality, and that is what causes, ironically, being and time to come to an abrupt halt long before the encounter of Hegel takes place. This means we have to see how Heidegger commences a direct confrontation with Plato, Aristotle, and Hegel, and the entire history of metaphysics to open another horizon of thought altogether. But that also means we cannot reduce the complexity of Plato, Aristotle, and Hegel. We agree with Heidegger's overall project in Being and Time that the history of Western metaphysics has not inquired deeply enough into how within timeness and the ordinary, inauthentic, infinitely flowing linear time levels off, if you recall in chapter 6, primordial temporalizing of temporality. However, we also have to affirm what he does, which is that he did not go far enough on his reflections on primordial temporality and got completely stuck on the enigma of motion, let alone how the two were connected. Plato, Aristotle, and Hegel cannot simply disappear. They have to be carefully deconstructed and appropriated post-Heidegger to reoccupy Heidegger's Being and Time. Okay, that's a long preface to get back to where I want to stay, which is 69. So let's return to the opening passage of section 69. Now Heidegger talks about the raptures and Schulkugeln within which the ecstatical unity of temporality occurs. We speak of an event as opposed to something residing in something else, for example, reducing time to space and saying that time takes place in space. The complex event is a condition of possibility for anything to be there, and therefore derives an ontic ready-to-hand or present-at-hand person, thing, object. But that also means space and time itself, and therefore not the Kantian pure a priori intuition in the Critique of Pure Reason, which is irreducible to any empirical sense of space and time as external things that are simply out there beyond the intuition or imagining subject. Here, once again, I, unfortunately, as always, take a slight detour through theology, not to defend it or to smuggle it into philosophy, but to juxtapose as something that we know Heidegger is not doing in, at least he says in the introduction, not doing any kind of theology, because theology too, as transcendental as it is still part of the ontic sciences. He's doing fundamental ontology. Let us read Heidegger more carefully. He speaks of that which allows a there as an entity which exists as it's there. There's a doubling of the word there that we have to keep in mind. To say I am there does not mean I am a being in a certain location of the world, i.e. the United States. But we can also contrast that, for example, our religious and theological registers in the New Testament. John 17:16, I'm not of the world, on the eve of Jesus' arrest, death, and resurrection and passion. To be in the world and not of it is the mystery of Jesus' own Christological transcendental subjectivity, his one substance with two natures, divine and human, eternal and temporal. Contrast even that, so just the ordinary empirical human being in the world, or this mysterious genealogical structure of being in the world but not of it. Contrast to both, Dasein as being there is grounded in the process of the temporalizing in the unity of the ecstasies. And if this ecstatical unity of temporality occurs in the raptures of the future of what has been and the present, then somehow the doubling of any simple there, presumably intuited as space or time, is converted into an entity that exists as it's there. You become the there. Where, there, here, there, not there. It's not space or time, and it's not the subject located in space and time. It's the clearing of all that. That's what makes this so fundamental, right? The grounding of the possibility of reorienting ourselves to metaphysics, properly posing the question, as he says in the introduction. It's been forgotten. And that's the problem. It's being there as an entity is the one that has been cleared. Okay, so I think I want to jump past the theology and get into the actual text itself. Where in 69 I've spent most of my time, at least in this article, and that's where I have the 4 different translations. And I hope that if I'm cutting out massive parts of my text, I hope it's not too confusing because people are already familiar with, for the most part, let's say the places that you spend a lot of time in Division 2 of being in time. But for me, the story is 65, 69, which we're seeing here, 72, 74. This sounds like I'm jumping around. All of this is to set up, which has been really for, I don't know how many years, Alfred, 25 years, an engagement with 82, with Hegel at the end. So that's my architectonic. So this is the passage where we're going to spend the remainder of our time, and then I'll conclude. Let us continue with 69, section 69, and try to interpret the passage that would take lifetimes to truly penetrate, if we have a chance of even going slightly beyond where Heidegger cannot go. In a seeming summary of the whole of being and time, this is what Heidegger states, this great paragraph. We've defined Dasein's being as care. The ontological meaning of care, the being of Dasein, is temporality. We've shown that temporality constitutes, the disclosedness of the there, and we've shown how it does so. In the disclosedness of the there, clearing, lighting, opening, but not the source, not the brightness, source of brightness from within, but the actual event of the clearing, opening, the world is disclosed along with it. The unity of significance, that is the ontological constitution of the world, whatever that's going to turn out to mean, must then likewise be grounded in temporality. Everything has to come back to temporality. The book, after all, is not called Time and Being. It doesn't start with time. It starts with being, the question of the meaning of being, but Division 2 is temporality. The existential temporal condition for the possible world lies in the fact that temporality as an ecstatical unity has something like a horizon. So we already know that. But here we go. Ecstasies are not simply raptures in which one gets carried away. Don't think of rapture as an event. Certainly don't think of it in religious terms. Paul's idea of the rapture at the parousia, Jesus' second coming, and the dead will rise, and we will also go and we'll meet Jesus in the sky. We're raptured away from the world. It's in some blink of an eye. Don't spatialize it. Don't make that onto that's religious. It's not mystical. A contentless, phenomenologically reduced mystical experience of that. Many of the great mystics in the Christian tradition can articulate. But he's saying here, good. He's making a nice, clear distinction. No, that's not raptures in which one gets carried away. Rather, it belongs to each ecstasis, a wither, the wohim, to which one is carried away. In English, we can wither to which the occurring, happening, stretching, the reference to which one is carried, perhaps, but the wither is more important than the actual event of the rapture. The wither to which the referent may be, but it's not a place. It's not a destination. You can't envision it. You can't see it. And again, don't go back to religion and theology, the rapture. The wither of each ecstasis we call the horizontal schema. In each of the 3 ecstasies, this unity of the 3 is different. So I'm going to look at each of the 3 ecstasies, but the unity of one ecstasy in relation to the 2 the horizon, the whole problem of the unity, which is what he has a hard time articulating. It's different in each of the three. Okay, wow, that's interesting. The schema in which we know these, pretty familiar, it's all of which is introduced in section 65. The schema in which Dasein comes towards itself futurely, letting itself come towards itself, the Kunft and the Kunftige, the Kunft and the Kunftige, the coming and coming up to, approaching, letting itself come towards itself, that primordial notion of futurity, not the future now point, whether authentically or inauthentically, that's the forsake of itself. But the schema, so that's one schema, that's futural, which Dasein is disclosed to itself in the state of mind is thrown, it's the fallenness, is to be taken as that in the face of which it has been thrown, forsake of itself merely in the face of which, and that to which it has been abandoned. Abandoned has so many different meanings, as you know. Left behind, left alone, forgotten, not cared for, discarded, but still there, alive. But this time he's talking about in the world, and as long as we're in the world, we're incomplete. And we know what's going to complete ourselves is death, but that means no longer being in the world, no longer being Dasein. And that's the paradox he introduces in chapter 1 on death. You need death to complete it. It's never going to be an event in time. You're not going to pass through it. We're not religious. Don't picture an afterlife or believe in that. Still living ourselves finitely. He wants to get to the very temporality of that, as you know. This characterizes horizontal schema of what has been, and existing for the sake of itself, in abandonment to itself as something that has been thrown. Dasein is being alongside, is at the same time making present. The horizontal schema for the present is defined by the in order to. So whatever making present ends up being, it's going to be some strange relationship between not only one of the ecstasies in relationship to the other two, I'll argue, but each ecstasy in relationship to the other two. Maybe that's a big making present, but we succumb to the making present very quickly. We have memory or trauma, or we're looking forward to something, we picture it, we make it present. That's the in order to, that's our direction. We try to give meaning to something, project, etc. And yet he wants to deconstruct that. Let me take a quick pause for all of our friends here so we can just, I'm very interested in learning more about the Spanish, but this is the exact same paragraph, if you can see this. And Alfred, I shifted text. Can people see the Spanish, or do I have to stop and share?
I can see it.
Yeah, I can see
Oh,
it.
great. Yeah, thank you. Here I see the word salidas. Los éxtasis no son simplemente salidas. I think that's the Entrukigen. We'll see that in the German. But for me, salid, and tell me, our Spanish friends, I mean, exit a este hacia que, which becomes the German wohin, and for us English, the whither to. Del éxtasis lo llamamos esquema horizontal. So the ecstatic or horizon is the schema. They're going to call that the ecstatic, the horizontal schema, sorry, for each wohin to wither of the ecstases. Hacia que. German, of course, I have to say for last, but I just want to look at the French too, because there we have here, los éxtasis ne sont pas simplement des échappées. I can't pronounce it, so Alfred or someone else can help me.
Échappé.
That's the rapture word. Yep. And verzu is the where, to where. So there again, a distinction is échappées, verzu. Let's go back to Spanish. The salidas versus the hacia que, and of course, I know we have a lot of German-speaking folks here, so we'll have to look at the naturally speak a little bit German. I'm curious, and those of you in our discussion, I need some help with the distinction between, in your minds, the wohin and the Entrukigen. So we're not going to go with Entruktigen, Entruktungen, but we're focusing on the wohin. Okay, so let's go back to the English. In this enormously rich and complex passage, we need to isolate a few terms and phrases. We saw horizon, whither, distinct from the rapture, wohin and Entruktungen, horizontal schema, then the three components, three of each of the ecstasies, futurely for the sake of itself, what has been in the face of which, the present in order to. Let us suspend any semantic possibilities that normally come to mind when we think of these words, whether in English or the original German. We do not begin with the human subject. It's experiencing itself through the flow of time, carrying their birth by rememorializing an alleged birth date, which of course we can't remember as an infant. Carrying both with them as they move towards death as an end that they cannot anticipate, even as they try to evade it, and certainly cannot accomplish on their own and return to tell about it. Come back from death and tell us what it's like. Excuse me. The accumulation of ontic or psychological time and the melee or nausea of aging, forever recollecting past trauma or glory, forever sinking into the eternal agony or joy of the present that does not seem to end, constant anticipation of what can be without ever knowing what tomorrow will bring. It's constantly invaded by calendar chronological linear time. Heidegger says this throughout Division 2. But that's what's being destroyed in Division 2. That's the original breakthrough for Heidegger. Destruction takes place through an attempted derivation of linear time from a deeper ground. That turns out to be the finite, authentic, unified, primordial, ecstatic temporality. To transcend this flow of linear time while being a living human being, and perhaps the dead too, ironically sinks us into a ground. And that's what's interesting about 69's whole title, that temporality, horizon, transcendence is also linked to a ground. It is to this ground that we shall try to go, submerging deeper within it. But again, movement is not motion in space or from one dimension to another. It's not like trying to dig a hole deeper, or even more bizarrely, a hole within a hole. Bizarre mathematical forms of modern geometry. Idealized intuitions of pure space and time beyond the senses will not help the ontological analysis. I don't want to go back to Kant. Others can. The ground is the movement in opening the question of the meaning of, not being, and hence not Heidegger's being in time, but the being of time. As tempting as it is to spatialize a conceptual notion that time is self-comprehended as a whole stretch, in which past, present, and future move together within and among themselves, and as a life in which it unfolds, we must resist this type of metaphysical search for the ground. This is where Heidegger is going to attack not only Plato and Aristotle. He starts that, he goes in a little bit of Augustine. But if you remember in 82, most of it's trying to deal with Hegel, but he goes after Bergson, the great French philosopher in the 19th century. This is not simply any issue of our insufferable physical mortality, that is, of not being able to transcend our finite moment in the present and the finite stretch of time from birth and death allotted to us, in order to see the whole stretch of time from birth to death from a transcendental viewpoint. That would mean being above death yet to occur and having the power to see the actual moment of our birth happen, something no human being can recall in their visual sensory memory. Nobody can talk about what it was like coming out of the womb. Our hypothesis is the following. The moving set of interrelations of the ecstasies that the passage above tries to describe in terms of the horizontal schemas by which the unity of ecstatic temporality as a horizon is structured differently for different reasons. The unities can be different for each ecstasis. Therefore, there are at least three possible sets of interrelations of the three ecstasies, with a future lead to what has been in the present. It would seem like we're speaking about triangles of possible relations between past, present, and future. But we're going to bracket this off as an impossibility. We're not dealing with pre-Heideggerian, certainly not doing math and fancy mathematics. We don't do that. Spatialized intuitions of space and time. But we're not going back to the pre-Heidegger history of metaphysics. And I want to see where I'm going to pause. You'll see where my text ends here. So just a few more paragraphs and we'll end. Furthermore, the horizontal schema refers to the passage, the whither, the wohin, which Heidegger contrasts with the more religiously loaded term raptures and Trugilum. In a preliminary stance, we can say the rapture is ontic with reference to religious and metaphysical understandings of human beings' emotions in either spiritual, bodily, or both, in the acts of transportation to some transcendental sphere. An earlier definition of some connotations of rapture, both religious and the ordinary usages. But see, even Hegel will tell you that's all part of picture thinking. As he says in the Phenomenology Sphere, and what philosophical theologians might probe as the mystical, particularly in Catholic Orthodox traditions. Christian traditions are obsessed with the mystery of the rapture, as in Paul's first letter. I mentioned that before. The early Heidegger was too, as you all know, but from a phenomenological historical encounter with primordial Christian religiosity and lived temporality, not a simple defense of Christian faith, phenomenology of religion, taking seriously that primordial Christian religiosity is looking. Or rather, he tried to reoccupy primordial Christian experience in St. Paul's first century CE time context from the vantage point of the parousia, and not what will follow later in the canonization of the New Testament and its doctrinal councils. But we're not going to go into religion here. That's not the point, but I just want to give you some context for why the Wohing is not this Christian rapture. With the ontological difference, however, whither will turn out to be something else entirely different as we continue to probe the perplexity of the horizontal unity, which is different for each of the horizontal schemas or each temporal ecstasis in relation to the other two. Let us say that the whither appropriate to each horizontal schema is not an actual place or a referent to what a subject can refer, like the apocalypse. Use Caesarean terminology. You're familiar with that. There's no signified behind the signifier that unites them in a sign. We'll split there and to go off maybe into some deconstruction like Derrida or even Lacan. Every signified is just another signifier delaying or deferring its true possibility that you could never arrive to. Rather, Dasein rather than ecstatic temporality is a movement of the equiprimordial soup, Gleichsprünglichkeit, also in section 65, the equiprimordiality of the ecstatic temporal interrelations, each of which are distinct and therefore have to be fleshed out. Beyond succession and simultaneity, but which the mind can never intuit or perceive, the interrelations move within and through each and other, but without a centered presence to view the whole. It's the whole point of finite temporality. Not just a finite amount of time and a linear stretch of time, but just reconceiving temporality in terms of the authentic finitude. We will attempt to articulate those distinctions next and draw out the consequences of their meaning for philosophy alone, not religion. So we have three different horizontal unities for which each horizontal schema describes the withering of each ecstasis. This is me just changing some of the words into taking wither and turning it to an event. In relation to the other two, each schema does so differently in its apprehension of the ecstatic unity. The unity is different in all three, as he says, of the whole. Here's another tangent. For those of you that remember that the very early Heidegger, 1905, is when Husserl gave his lectures on the internal time consciousness. I did go back to that recently, and it's Heidegger who ultimately edited it much later when it came out. Husserl didn't publish it at the time. I don't want to take a deep breath there because it's a lot to take in, but I'm convinced that what Heidegger is doing in Being and Time, of course, it's just stating the obvious, is an absolute critique of what Husserl is up to. But what Husserl is up to is not by no means obviously simple. He too is not prioritizing presence, in other words, when he's thinking of the flux of retentions and protensions, when he's trying to think the experience of temporality phenomenologically. We have to imagine all possible interrelations and differences within each horizontal schema and between them, futurely for the sake of itself in relation to having been and making present, having been as thrownness, or rather in the face of which it has been thrown and abandoned in relation to futurely and making present, and present as the in order to in relation to futurely and having been. Present is what typically it takes us over and engulfs us, because then we start to think about the presentification of futurely and having been. There are interrelations and differences with each of these schemas, let alone the massive undertaking of describing the interrelations and differences between all three of them. This is just a logical constraint, but you can only take these three and multiply them 6 times. These are the only configurations you can come up with. I won't read them, it's tedious, but unless someone can tell me there's another way to configure these three, but you can do it 6 times. The enumeration of 6 relations takes us beyond the actual text of Being and Time. He doesn't talk about this. There's nothing in Division 2 that evokes 6 within the equiprimordiality or the ecstatic unity as horizon of section 69. It's our responsibility to show what is buried beneath Heidegger's formulations on the 3 sets of ecstatic schemas consisting of the futurely having been present. And these are necessary possibilities. Possibilities help us articulate the 4-dimensional temporality that would constitute the supersynthesis of all 3 ecstatic horizontal schemas, each with their own relations of ecstasies. And this is how they relate to each other in a larger whole that seems to be eluding division two. And I have to put this footnote here because I don't want to confuse this with, to give Heidegger his credit, forget about the Vierfalt and the Gewalt in the later works and the problem of the fourfold, especially with all those semantic metaphors that he uses: earth, sky, divinities, human. But the Time and Being 1962 lecture on four-dimensionality. If you recall that text, at the very end, he says true time is four-dimensional. I always come back to that cryptic statement. This way, we can elaborate further what Heidegger means by the unity proper to ecstatic temporalizing temporality as a horizon. This will help us ground ontologically what will later appear as statements on the swoon. To come back to my original title, and Ohnmacht and clairvoyance. It's my hypothesis that we really want to get into Augenblick and eigentlich Geschichtlichkeit, authentic historicality, not just the handing down or the repetition or how the destiny of the people, or how one can give themselves a certain fate, bring themselves back to what they originally were, but in a more in the repetition in a more authentic way. That's the complexity of the Geschichtlichkeit debates in chapter 5. But I'm captivated by this footnote in this Ohnmacht clairvoyance. There, the great discussion about the moment of vision and what takes place with regard to Geschichtlichkeit. All this is prior to the penultimate encounter with Hegel's phenomenology. And then we end here, 2 paragraphs, and I'm done. Of course, all this has to do with being at its time, not to be confused with the New Testament theological and religious idea, the kairos, or the fulfillment of time when God sent his son. When the time was fulfilled, God sent his son at the time. For the latter sending is inclusive of the Christological unity of the pre-existent logos, the virginal conception to a human mother, a life lived with miraculous events like walking on the water, saw from the Gospels, encounters with other human beings, real death, real human being, real death, not a fake death, real resurrection that nobody saw in a sealed tomb. They saw a resurrected being that came out later and talked to people, but wasn't inside the tomb. A real ascension back to the Father, and then sending of the Holy Spirit during the earthly time of the church in anticipation of an apocalyptic end in the parousia of the second coming. Those of you that are familiar with Western Christianity, of course, and Eastern, Western and Eastern, that's the whole point of the filioque and the split. For the Orthodox, it retains the mystery of the Father sending the Holy Spirit, but the split for the Western Roman Catholic Church was the Father and the Son send the Holy Spirit, not just the Father. So I'm going to bracket that in respect to the Orthodox traditions. We shall see how our expansion of Heidegger's ideas will be diametrically opposed to New Testament dogmatic conceptions that underpin all mainstream Christian traditions, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox. The ontological meaning of this intentional attack on the doctrines has to be fleshed out and has nothing to do with the debates about theism versus atheism. All Christian theologies grounded in philosophical explanations still require the historical belief in an actual person, Jesus, as a metaphysical conception that is Christological, one substance and two natures, divine and human, as one person with two others in the Father and the Holy Spirit. We can compose a trinity, not a quadruplicity, but a trinity. Of course, this is all grounded in faith, which quite frankly is not the matter at hand. The fact of the matter is this: all theologies are ontic, insofar as they try to be a positive science, and therefore have some residue of the present at hand or the ready at hand, even in belief or intuition, if not pictographic icons and images. Furthermore, there's not an extant world religion that does not exist by and for human beings, as far as I can see. Others can debate that, the later Derrida on animality in animals and non-anthropomorphized view of their ontology. But simply put, religion is for human beings. Therefore, atheism too can only come from human beings. For example, since there are no extraterrestrial beings on Earth, there are no extraterrestrial religions by and for them. Heidegger feels justified in lumping radically different fields such as mathematics, physics, biology, and theology together in the category of the positive sciences. That cuts back to the introduction. This is where I'll end. We, however, are not interested in either the history of metaphysics, which tries to construe being as one, and time only of three axes, past, present, and future, or the history of their conceptualizations and interrelations, however profound that occurs in the works of Plato, Aristotle, Kant, and Hegel. And this tradition, of course, is not simple. It too questions the linear flowing clock, chronological calendar now points, present is now, past is no longer now, future is yet to be now. But as Heidegger desperately tries to stave off having to conclude Division 2 of being time, he asks if and whether time has any being. It's chapter 6. And beyond whether we can even construe time as being. Wow. Kind of goes back to book 4 of Aristotle's Physics, and throughout Plato, of course. But this is really the crux, and then, of course, with Kant and Hegel, this becomes the crux of the issue. What do we do with time? We cannot think of being in time as their relation, or time as substance, or that which does not change in order for empirical change to take place within it, since time is nothing but a pure a priori intuition, never an object of experience. One cannot come up with the concept or notion of time as any kind of spatialized or intuitive metaphysical substance, as if time were composed of things. Other philosophers and continental European philosophers in the 20th century may try to do that, from Bergson to Deleuze, but that's not Heidegger. We know what Heidegger's critique is. And of course, we're not engaging in any kind of positive science. This is the work of fundamental ontology. It requires its destruction. As he says, it's not aimed at the past, but the present. That's what Heidegger is. He's dealing with his own historical present. Let me stop the text here and try to weave the threads together. So what am I dealing with? I think the equiprimordiality, the Gleichsprünglichkeit, sorry for me butchering the German. I only had one cup of coffee, and it's 3:00 today, my time. But the equiprimordiality in section 65, and this question of process of the temporalities, temporality being prior and emerging from itself, or some kind of spatialized, systematized structure that sociologists of time, and of course physicists and everybody else, they want to spatialize everything. No. We have to take seriously the process of the temporalizing. And when we move to 69, we get even this richer distinction between rapture and the longing with the schemas. And then I'm saying the possibility of thinking the unity of each of the three differently. And then that kind of sets up the chance to really revisit chapter 5 on historicality, Geschichtlichkeit, but not with an attention to historicality, or Augenblick, the moment of vision, or even the footnote on the swoon and the clairvoyance, the Hellsichtigkeit and the Ohnmacht. I wish I had time, but I'll give us the whole quote of that, which is another summary of being time in section 54. But I firmly believe that if Heidegger could have kept going, and you heard me talk about this, speculating about all the possibilities for the Division 3, not basic problems, not ecstatic temporality in Leibniz, 28, not 29, boredom, solitude, and not again, book 9 of the Metaphysics of Aristotle, 31, and of course, before he leaves it all and has to take a break, and before he becomes director in 1933, the lecture on the phenomenology of spirit, of which it's only on the first part, not even the end, absolutely only where I spend all my time, and the science of logic. But movement and really trying to research what this non-linear, non-circular, non-rectilinear relationship between the ecstasies that harbors the problem of movement, which he says in the early 30s, Alfred, is because we think temporality is the big problem. He says, no, the Ratzel, the enigma of motion. Metaphysics motion has to be the hardest thing that the Western mind can try to tackle in the history of metaphysics. And he's paying homage to Plato and Aristotle, of course. But that's really what eludes him. And for those of us that try to go back into it, you try to get back into the problem of movement, and you're naive. You're wasting your time. You didn't even read Heidegger and understand being in time. If you think you're going to go back there and take on the problem of movement, because then you're just like Plato, Aristotle, and Hegel. I don't see that. I don't make that move. I think there's movement buried in being in time, and Heidegger couldn't articulate it. But we got to work within the text and keep doing what it couldn't do to get to the wither, which is not a destination, but the experience of it occurring, the experience of the withering. I'll conclude there. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Roy, once more, for your intricate presentation, as always. Any questions or comments?
I would thank you very much, Raj, and I joined your presentation very late, so I was gone for the morning. Could you just make visible again the French passage of the text that you discussed, where the concept of Entrückung or rapture is discussed? Since in German I read, and I read the German now, die Ekstasen sind nicht einfach Entrückungen zu, vielmehr gehört zur Ekstase ein Wohin der Entrückung. And I don't know what Heidegger is trying to point out, because Entrückung zu already indicates a direction. So why does he say vielmehr gehört zur Ekstase ein Wohin der Entrückung? So if you can just make the French again visible, I would like to see how the French tries to word that.
Yes, I do too, and we can also invite the Spanish as well. But just so that for the audience, they can see the Wohin der Entrückung. And please correct my German. I can't even pronounce it. Entrückung. I want to get the
Entrückung. And it's
Entrückung.
basically a compound word, Entrückung, which
What's
means
going on with the Entrückung? What? How do you get rapture in English out of that?
well,
What is
Entrückung,
this?
you're taken out of a situation into not towards another situation. That's Entrücken. So Rücken means you move,
Right,
you move.
right,
Basically,
Rücken.
it's
Okay,
not you
now it's
moving, something moves you into something
right.
else. And that
Okay,
is basically you're overcome by that. And
got it.
it's direction. And so both phrases, um, the one that says die Ekstasen sind nicht einfach Entrückung zu, so they are.
Mm-hmm.
Entrückung towards something, but vielmehr gehört zur Ekstase ein Wohin. So I don't know why he says vielmehr. So there must be something that I don't understand that he tries to point out. So maybe you know that.
You're giving me too much.
Could you make
Let's go to the French now, and then we can see the chapes. In the Spanish, by the way, it becomes the salidas, the hacia. But can you see the French, Aki?
Yes.
Yes, I can see it.
I trust your translation of the French too. Don't sell yourself short. So you tell me what you see.
Let's just try to find the passage.
It's a couple of lines beneath 365.
Les extases ne se font simplement
Des échappées vers,
de
bien
vers.
plutôt un verso de l'échappée appartient-il à l'extase. So what's the difference between verso and vers? So I don't
Yeah,
know.
Dat is
there's a
Wohin.
verso and ver. Alfred?
Dus in Veru is hin wo. Translated back into German. And not the Wohin.
Yeah, and I don't see the difference. So, but what I understand, what he's trying to say, each of the three ecstasies, I think in English, for each the Wohin is different, and for the future, the Wohin is he calls it the Willen seiner, for the sake of Dasein itself. That means, I assume, the authentic self of Dasein. That's the Wohin of the ecstasis that is the future. And then the present and the past have different Wohins, with different directions. And I think for the present, it is what he calls the sein bei, the being alongside with others. And for the past, I think the schema is, that's the scheme, I think, the Schema is the Geworfenheit, the being thrown. That's, I think, what he means. But you referred to the three ecstasies as, I think, a soup. I think that was your wording, that metaphor I found intriguing. Why did you choose the soup? Since they are distinct, as you say also in your presentation, and also it's explicitly there. You said they are distinct, the three, but nevertheless a soup. But I wonder what you mean by that. What you want? Do you try to point out the unity, the equiprimordiality of the three ecstasies? Or what is this metaphor of the soup about?
Yeah, the soup fails because it looks like it prioritizes the present, it's present at hand, it's a meta unity of the three, of how the unity is different in each of the three. I don't want to get into triangles. Imagine a triangle where one ecstasy is just pointing to the other two. You keep doing that, create arrows and directions throughout the triangle. or have three finals, each starting with each one of the ecstasies. It becomes this spatialized thing, and then the whole being in time project collapses. Then I'm back to Hegel, and I've struggled with it. So, but it is the equiprimordiality, the Gleichsprünglichkeit, as it, and this problem of the unity, which he wants to say here, because he says it in the very beginning, the Existentialisierung, the meaning of the possibility of the world lies in the fact that the temporality's ecstatic unity is something like a horizon. So there is not the title of the table of content, everything's about one horizon, but the unity of this horizon is going to be different for each of the three, because I think phenomenologically, he doesn't want to, what happens is when you start intuiting the letting itself come towards itself, the futural, component here, the forsake of itself, you start to spatialize things quickly, and then you start to create relationships between past and present in relationship to that. And we need to have the courage and the strength to resist that. And same with the abandonment, the thrownness, you're already in the world, Dasein just can't come out of nothing or be some kind of transcendental subject that's not in the world. That's its facticity, but it's not an empirical fact either. It's not a bounded subject in space and time. That's the Dasein spatiality term. That's all division one. You can't even identify the subject of Dasein. It's not a simple I'm here and this is the I. The I may not be. That's what's so uncanny about it. And of course, you're not just apart from the they. I remember the discussion about the nosotros and the gente. So that's what's so brilliant about brilliant. It's an understatement. That's what's the breakthrough in Heidegger is this completely changing the way we even start to pose the question about but doing it at time as a horizon. So I think the best thing to do is your question is soup is not present at hand. I'm just trying to say is that I have a feeling, excuse me, that at least in 69, because we have that stark distinction between the Entrückung and the Wohin, and the Wohin doesn't have to have a referent, and it's not the metaphysics of a point moving from one thing to another. It's not the anticipation of a destination. It gives us the fidelity to take seriously death as the possibility of impossibility. It's the greatest possibility for Dasein to be. And yet that's never an event in time. And that's what kind of rounds out that our finitude. And again, as you know this, you all know this, you have to contrast that with biological, physical death, witnessing the death of the other, or doctors telling us when we're dying and have an afterlife, or we're dead and the near-death experience, we go somewhere and come back. And then the only other character in the history of everything is this strange figure called Jesus as a hypostatic substance of real death, but a unity of time and eternity. So, if we can reduce that complexity and phenomenologically encounter it, like the early Heidegger tried to do, Hakim, you know a lot about this, contrast it with that, but also just biological death, then we're back to this question of, what is the deepest motivation for Heidegger after chapter 1 on death, when he's stuck with this interrelationship between these abandonment, loss, the mystical trap, the powerlessness, because that's what drives the fact that we have to collapse and faint in this abandonment. And I don't want that to be the forsakenness on the cross that turns Jesus into a human being and forces us to understand that kenosis and emptying out in transcendental terms, not a physical human being dying and suffering, but something beyond. Got to avoid that.
Can I just join in here? Just briefly, since I see that Eric also wants to
Yeah.
Sorry. Comment.
Yeah.
And,
Please.
So the Überlassenheit, the abandonment, your translation, I see in that term already at work silently a sense of Gelassenheit. So, but what he has in mind here with Überlassenheit, I think Überlassenheit,
Überlassenheit.
Überlassenheit is being alongside with other beings, entities. I think being thrown into the world already makes you be together with other beings, human beings, but also with other entities, things. And he doesn't examine it further what that means, but I think the later Heidegger tries to bring out some kind of authentic way of being alongside with other things. So it's not just everydayness and the superficiality of not being primordially, no longer being primordially connected with the things themselves. And that's why we don't see them as themselves and don't let them reveal themselves to us
Mm.
as
Mhm.
what they are and how they are. And I think the later Heidegger tries to bring it out. So the Überlassenheit then becomes Gelassenheit. That's my reading of it.
Interesting.
So that's so and maybe there is a place also for a notion of rapture. So some kind of in my paper I talked about Erlösung, which Heidegger doesn't use, but I see it at work. That sense of the religious connotation, I see it work in. I think Heidegger stands firmly in the ancient Greek and the Christian Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yeah.
I think that is so both. He has both feet planted on
Sure.
that ground, and I think that shines through his language. So I don't think that I read it into it. I think I recognize it, but that's just my take of it. So that's
Thank you,
positive.
Danke. Danke
Mhm.
for this proximity of Gelassenheit and Überlassenheit. I do have a lot to say I want to come back to, but I want to give Eric a chance. So, but thank you.
So good.
I'll keep
Thank you.
I'll go
Very
ahead.
wonderful. Thank you, Raj. Very good.
Okay, Eric.
Hi, Ash. Congratulations, your work. I think about this, your presentation, the great importance of primordial Christian experience on Heidegger's thought, Heidegger's philosophy. It's possible it's possible see two great traditions, and as influenced, Heidegger's influenced. On the side, the philosoph tradition, Aristotle, Plato, etc., etc. In the other side, this Christian tradition in primordial Christian experience. For example, you quoted Epistole Galatians, Galatian Epistle, and First and Second Thessalonians. Heidegger's investigation about two epistles and Second Corinthians 12, 10, 12, 12 to from 2:10 verses in GA 60, Phenomenology of the Life Religion. I think this is very important in development Heidegger's philosophy in Bathing time, especially from these paragraphs 45 followings about the being dead. This paragraph 69 about this Dasein's importance. Dasein's have a prominence position towards other entities, for example, dogs, cats, tables, house, other entities, not Dasein, or intramundane entities. Heidegger deny Calvin's concept imago Dei, but Heidegger's influenced by Christian primordial Christian experience, and says the Dasein has a prominent position toward over other beings, other entities, because then only Dasein is temporality, historicity. Dasein have a word. Dasein have a language, etc., etc. As like see, like read in being time. I believe this great importance in Heidegger's and Booth meetings when then studied the John Gospels. Of course, Bultmann not influenced Heidegger anymore. on contrary, Heidegger is a biggest influence on Rudolf Bultmann theology. But I believe these studies not Rudolf Bultmann's influence on Heidegger, but this more importance in Heidegger's development of his philosophy. Not only in the first period of his philosophy, being time until 1930, but in Heidegger last Heidegger, following 1930, because this Heidegger says, for example, in GA 11, Identität und Differenz, the necessity to abandon God's metaphysical and approximation to the gods, divine gods, who I am. Dance, I'm pray, I'm sings, I'm songs, but the God's metaphysical is categorical God. This is a dead's God, or Gott ist tot, nichts Gott ist tot, because this metaphysical God is in the man's speculation, not a relationship in originally or primordial Christian experience. This primordial Christian experience is very important, Heidegger, to claim about the problems, for example, historical problems. Heidegger have a duty as a point to conduce the von Jotenburg, Paul York's thought about this story, because it is Paul York's considerations about story is grounded in his Christian experience. This is his experience. Speaks Spanish. Llamó la atención de Heidegger. Heidegger focused his attention in York's Christian experience, in his development historical problems in Pagan time. Thus, I consider it the most important, the great importance, a primordial Christian experience as one influences, no one, because this the other side, Heidegger have a philosophy tradition influence, but influence. Thus, the Christian primordial experience is very important in Bain time development, in project philosophical. Heidegger's project philosophical carried Bain time is very important. Inclusive, the great importance, Agustin, Kierkegaard, this influence, importance are biggest.
So I'm not sure it was a question, but
Well, Alfred, if you can indulge me 2 minutes,
Yes.
first of all, to link, tell me about your transition. I know you want to close the conference. What time do we want to end my session? That I could be mindful.
You can have a final say, and then we'll slowly close the conference.
Okay. So let's keep this under just 3 minutes because I'm hoping we can continue. To get back to, thank you, Eric. I mean, that really kind of captures the genealogy. Kegel and before him, Macquarie, the theologian, gives us the entire history leading up to, and many other scholars. I mean, you have to go back to William Richardson's generation to see that, in fact, the religious component was very key to understanding the early Heidegger, even in the history of Anglo-American scholarship. And today we may not talk about it this much. But Akim on the Gelassenheit versus the Überlassenheit, and it does link back to everything Eric is saying. I guess in those phenomenology of religious life lectures, if you look at what we are presented with and what's available in terms of the notes, it's not just Galatians and Corinthians and then the first and second letter to the Thessalonians, but the appendices on eschatology. Heidegger is taking seriously this problem of the parousia, but it's not just the Pauline declaration that we've having already been transformed as non-witnesses to the original event. The disciples might have been there, but this metanoia and turning that occurs for St. Paul, is the having beenness of this, and then the expectation and awaiting of the full kind of embodiment of what that means to be. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. But Heidegger, it's not just the Catholic rupture, it's scholasticism. And of course, he's hanging out with the Protestants like Bultmann. And as you know, he's teaching people the early leading up to being a time. He's teaching Karl Rahner, the Catholic, Paul Tillich, the Protestant. Those guys can need to come back into the Trinitarian structure and Christology. But we all know that Heidegger is a very strange Verdi guy. He's a very, very, it's not even a question of, as I said, theism or atheism. He says as much. I don't take a stance for or against sin. He's talking about Luther and Kierkegaard in one of the endnotes of Division 2, Being in Time. So that leaves us sort of in suspense. And of course, 1927 Phenomenology and Theology lecture, Christianheit, Christianness versus being a Christian. This may sound a bit crazy, but the reason, Akim, I can't go into the Gelassenheit here is back to being alongside with the things, even though that's what this says, the making present in 69. The scary, crazy figure that you have in that Phenomenology of Religious Life lectures that includes the appendices and the eschatology is this Allgemeine Frage of the Antichrist. And he's not talking in terms of the trope or the literal figure or the proclamation and anticipation that you have in John's Revelations, of course, this historic figure of the Antichrist, the son of the devil, the incarnation of the devil. And it's not the weird problem in the second letter to the Thessalonians and Paul, which is, the lawlessness one, the one who will show himself and take the seat in the temple and present himself as God. And the restrainer has to be lifted in its time. And then, of course, the parousia is the coming of Jesus who will destroy him with the coming of his breath. That's that Paul is so early as a non-witness, way before the Gospels, and certainly before John of Patmos. And I think that Dasein is carving out a space here to reoccupy. To be an antichrist is not to be opposed to Jesus, but a reoccupation of the inner messianic consciousness. And this is where the problem of evil arises. Let's bracket the Nazi question. But if Heidegger, the person, really thought he was this ambitious, obviously he wrote Being in Time, wanted to take on all of Western metaphysics. Well, he was going to take on all of Western Christianity from within. And it's to reoccupy the problem of temporality and erase our simple notions of birth and death and give us the finitude and anticipation and the anguish and the abandonment. But don't arrive at Christian faith. So Hegel wants to outhaven the picture thinking of the Trinity into a bigger, more complex structure and absolute known. It's that passage or transition conceptualized and remembered. The genius of Christianity is the fulfillment of time. But both Hegel and Heidegger recognize, Hegel in Revealed Religion, and Heidegger in his own critique earlier on, is that this unity of time in the Son it's actually split, and that's the unhappy consciousness, because it still has to wait some future event, which is the parousia. So Hegel says, I want to outhaven that whole thing. Heidegger doesn't go to that absolute structure as unit. He burrows back into it, and he has solace in this figure who has a type of temporalization in this the figure of the Antichrist. Is that what could be totally opposed to Christianity is not some simplistic pictographic idea of evil, but truly, Alfred or Akim, give me a good German word. How do you say Akim? Arnaktigkeit, because that's in Hegel, absolutely. Arnaktigkeit is stubbornness of the absolute, and also wrath.
Say the German word again slowly.
You know, as an English American speaking guy, and my German, I can't even pronounce it. Hartnäckigkeit.
Hartnäckigkeit.
You mean Hartnäckigkeit?
Yeah.
Hard-headedness.
Oh, stubbornness.
Hard-headedness. But
Yeah.
instead of head, the word is Nacken, like the neck. Hard-neckness, maybe.
Okay.
Hartnäckigkeit.
Well, you know, instead of having the loving Jesus, because you have this in approach, it's actually an absolute no in Hegel, is this the ability to sacrifice oneself and the wrath that goes with it. Because the Jesus we have is this poor suffering guy, and he's innocent and he's loving on to the end. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they're doing. But then he's also crying, why have you forsaken me? That's what everybody's been built. You, especially in the West, been built around this Dasein of like having this authentic understanding and feeling bad for this guy. And I think what Hegel and Heidegger are doing.
Can I just one caveat? Yes, the suffering and the loving Christ, Jesus, but read Gospel of John, chapter 8 to the end. There you have the hard-headed, stubborn,
Well,
angry
not just
Jesus.
John.
Okay?
No, it's not just John. It's the synoptics. It's also the synoptics. He's plenty of bad Jesus. Jesus getting pissed off. So I do want to honor your question, Eric and Akim, but I think the ecstatic temporalization as this equiprimordial soup has to reinvigorate the question of movement. Augustine, the reference to Augustine at the end and before he gets 81, before he gets to Hegel in 82, and of course the whole time, all my work is really the encounter with Hegel. But in Augustine, it's that extendedness of the soul. And Aristotle, without the soul, you can't even talk about time. And then maybe it's the daemon and the timaeus, the moving image of eternity in Plato. We see those quotes. He really is circling with that. And of course, he's obsessed with book 4, Aristotle's Physics, about all the registers of time. Like, why do I get this? Hey, I'm almost there. Wow, I've been waiting for such a long time. And all these ontic kind of registers that he thinks the metaphysics tries to make metaphysical, they don't even pose the question properly. And you're right, the inspiration, Eric, comes from an anti-Christological temporalization. I write that later on in the paper. But you got to build a being in time around that. And we don't have that in Division 2.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I agree with you.